When your nonprofit gets registered to fundraise, it's a huge win. But there's a critical step that happens after that initial excitement that a lot of organizations miss. So today, we're going to break down the annual renewal process and explain exactly why it's so important to get right.
And just so you know, this explainer is part of the Multi-State Fundraising Compliance Series. It's a resource put together by the experts over at Ironwood Registrations, and it's all designed to make this stuff, charitable solicitation, practical and easy to understand.
So let's start with a common scenario. Most nonprofit leaders, they really focus on getting that initial registration to start fundraising in a new state. But what happens after you get that green light? Is the work actually done?
Not even close. You see, that initial approval isn't really the finish line. It's more like the starting block for all your ongoing compliance. And that brings us to this really critical and honestly, often overlooked requirement.
It's so important to understand the difference here. Think of it like this. Your initial registration, that's the one-time application you filed to start fundraising. But the annual renewal, that's a recurring thing you have to do every single year just to keep fundraising legally.
And this is the key. Annual renewal is not automatic. It's a proactive process. Your organization has to actively file new forms, submit updated documents, and pay those fees every single year to stay in good standing. The states won't do it for you.
So, what does this whole process really look like? Let's dive in and break down what an annual renewal actually is, what it includes, and, well, the really tricky part, when it's due.
At its core, what is an annual renewal? Really, it's just an annual check-in with each state. You're giving them updated info to prove that your nonprofit is still active, that your financials are current, and that you're operating by the book.
And believe me, the paperwork can be pretty substantial. For every state, you're usually looking at their own specific renewal form, your latest IRS Form 990, updated financials, and, of course, a new filing fee. It's a really comprehensive update that pretty much touches on every part of your organization.
Now, this is where it gets tough. There's no single universal deadline. As you can see, the due dates are all over the place, depending on the state. Some tie it to your fiscal year end, others have a fixed date, some link it to your Form 990, and others use your original registration anniversary. Just trying to keep track of this is a major hurdle.
Okay, so if tracking one deadline is a pain, just imagine what happens when you're fundraising in multiple states. This is exactly where compliance goes from being tricky to being really complicated really fast.
For example, let's think about a nonprofit that's actively fundraising in, say, 15 different states. And that's not unusual for a growing organization. But what does a number like 15 actually mean when it comes to the workload?
Well, it means you're not managing one renewal anymore. You're juggling 15 of them. And each state has its own forms, its own required attachments, its own payment processes. That's 15 different deadlines to track, and they often hit right when your team is already swamped with your annual audit and the Form 990.
With all that complexity, you can see how a deadline could get missed. It happens, but the consequences, they're significant. Let's talk about the real risks of falling out of compliance.
And we're not just talking about a little slap on the wrist. You've got direct financial hits, like late fees and penalties. But even more seriously, you're looking at reputational damage, like being publicly listed as delinquent, and even operational shutdowns, where a state can literally suspend your ability to fundraise at all.
Okay, so we get the problem, and we definitely get the risks. So how do we master this whole thing? Well, let's start by busting a couple of common myths, and then I'll lay out a practical framework for getting it right.
This might be the most common assumption we see. A nonprofit leader thinks, hey, our CPA does our Form 990, so they must be taking care of these state renewals too, right?
But the reality is, filing your federal Form 990 is a totally separate task from filing these state-level charitable solicitation renewals. Unless you have a very specific agreement with your CPA to handle them, it's just not part of their standard service.
And here's another common pitfall. An organization files for a federal tax extension with the IRS, and they just assume that covers everything at the state level too.
But the truth is, a federal extension doesn't automatically apply to your state renewal deadlines. Some states might accept it, sure, but many don't, or they have their own separate process for requesting an extension. You really have to check the rules for each and every state.
So how do you manage all this? Here's a simple 5-step framework. First, maintain a master calendar. Put all your state deadlines in one place. Second, align those dates with your audit and 990 timelines so there are no surprises. Third, and this is critical, assign one person clear ownership of the process. Fourth, after you file, always confirm the state accepted it. Don't just assume. And finally, document your status for the board, because at the end of the day, this is a matter of good governance.
And that really brings us to the bigger picture here. This whole process, it's about so much more than just filing some paperwork on time. It is a fundamental piece of good governance.
So, why does this administrative task matter so much? Because doing renewals right is really the foundation of trust. It shows your donors that you're transparent. It proves your legal compliance to grant makers. It's the practical way you demonstrate that your organization is absolutely committed to the highest standards.
Look, if you take away only one thing from this whole explainer, please let it be this. Getting that initial registration approval, that is simply the start line. It is absolutely the beginning, not the end, of your ongoing compliance responsibilities.
And if you'd like to dive deeper into this topic, you can find more compliance guides and educational resources over at ironwoodregistrations.com. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer.